was one of the analogies that we used that really came up about this too was one of the business owners that I was talking to that just didn't get this and just didn't believe that this was that important. And he said, no, we get along great. We have great Thanksgivings and great Christmases. We get together every week or every couple of weeks as a family. We have great conversations. It's wonderful. And the observation that I talked about last time that really stuck with this person, and many others commented on it, was that notion of, okay, great, well, how often did you see your brother when you were 10? And they said, every day. I mean, we rolled out of the beds in the same bedroom, and we had to decide who got to the bathroom first, and we were making decisions right off the bat. I said, great, what about at 20? And they said, well, less frequently, I mean, in the summers and stuff. And what about 30? Oh, by now we had families, and we saw each other maybe once or twice a year, but not much more. How about 40s? Oh, when that, and what he recognized is, you know, aren't there things that can happen in those people's lives, struggles they went through, lessons they learned that you're actually clueless of? And you may know them from the past, but do you know them where they are today? And it was that was falling apart in families and causing a lot of the presenting problems down the road when they didn't have experience at making decisions together based on where they were and where they are. Well, that was a little bit of last meeting. This meeting, what we're focusing on is getting from the red dot down to the green dot. And the 6-step process that we created is designed to do just that. And where this process comes from is I've had over 20 years of running family meetings for over 200 families now, most of which they were running a first family meeting to address family governance issues, and were really pretty clueless of the concepts in general, because many of these go back quite a way. To date, I've run over 350 actual family meetings. The numbers have increased over time per family, as many of the early projects were just a 1 meeting and we were done. But also back in the beginning, there were very few examples of what the process would look like. There wasn't a robust process. There weren't guidelines. This was stuff that researchers and people like me that were out there practicing up or figuring out as we went along. Largely, I based my approach on many of the business consulting approaches that I had worked with. I had seen management teams that I'd worked on where we brought in consultants to help us build a better collaboration and functioning team and process. And I saw the tools that they were using. Many of those were the tools that I was implementing within families, some of which, by the way, I still use, and I think they're excellent. Some I've changed to better ones. But the same was true with charitable boards that I was serving on, that oftentimes they'd have a board retreat and bring in consultants to help the board work better together. And a lot of the research has supported this, and certainly my client experience has supported this, that what was working to help an unrelated group of people to work better together, to know each other better, to learn about each other, learn each other's strengths and weaknesses. What was working for an unrelated group of people typically tends to work with a related group of people as well. But anyway, remember, when you decide to build a family governance capability, it has to be scalable. It's hugely beneficial to the families that you're offering it to, or that if your own family is involved. I'm a big believer in Edward Deming's work. If you remember Edward Deming, who was a business consultant back in the 40s, but he, in some of his lessons and tools and research he did, he found that upwards of 85% of the results you will achieve in a project or initiative can come from the first 15% of the effort you put into that project. Yet, and what he meant by that is that if you're heading in the right direction, you'll make so many big picture strategic learning concepts together and directional decisions early on that is really accomplishing 80 to 85% of where you're ultimately going to get. And the last bit is just the minutia, the detail. Unfortunately, though, many people that try to get involved in family governance space create a deep dive approach with psychologists who often don't know where to stop. I was talking to a family about this last week, and they said, yeah, when you're working with a psychologist, how do you know when you're done with them? And because they wouldn't tell you. And it's a real problem. If you've got a dive deep mentality of what you're offering, it's very expensive for the client. It's very expensive for you as a family or for the advisor, and it's not scalable. So the 6-step process gets the highest benefit to the family while being scalable enough to keep it affordable to you, your clients, and your family. It is not, however, a hard and fast structure. Every family is different, and the process needs to have flexibility. Much of the flexibility really comes from the facilitator and the level of experience that the facilitator has working with families. But know your boundaries and don't try too deep a dive. Whether you're an advisor, a parent, or a family member, know your boundaries. Well, let's get into the actual 6-step process then. Here is the 6-step process. The first step is an assessment of where are we today. Second, we believe is an education of the family as a whole of what are the issues, and so that the family understands them as a whole. Third, alignment. This is, if most of the reason for failure is due to lack of communication. So we take families through a communication test. I'm going to show you the test we take them through and some others you can choose from, and why we chose the one we did. But that's the step 3, alignment part 1. Alignment part 2 is a values exercise. What are our individual and shares values? And again, I'm going to show you some tools that we take families through, some that we don't use anymore, but you might find them helpful for what you're doing. The next step we think is action. By the way, notice we haven't really taken any action yet. This is a learning process and learning about each other process all the way up to step 5. When they start now making decisions of what can we do together based on what we've learned and about each other, let alone the issues at hand. And then finally, how do you link all the work the family's done to the estate plan? How do you make sure the estate plan is now designed to fulfill the purpose of the family that the family is now working towards, rather than designed to just protect the money? And Marvin Blum is going to come in near the end of this talk to give a little bit of a teaser of what a structure could look like that could actually give it a great example of pulling together what the estate plan can look like and the advancement, long-term advancement of the family. Step 1 on the assessment, Peter Culver is going to help me out. And by the way, Peter Culver is the CEO of IWM, Independent Wealth Management. He's sort of like a private CFO for a family, and he doesn't manage the money for the family. He often comes in, does a 30,000-foot view of the overall structures of the assets and the like, and can give family observations about that. He's going to talk a little bit about the financial assessment that he does. Marvin's going to come in, and Marvin is the founding partner of the Blum firm, and he's going to come in later in this talk and talk a little bit about how step 6 works in the equation. So let me jump in. Step 1. Step 1 is the assessment, and there are 2 parts, or 3 parts actually, but 2 basic parts. One is an assessment of the family itself, where they are from a governance and relationship standpoint. The second part focuses on really 2 things: the assets that the family owns, whether it's enterprises, businesses, and the like, and the structure, the estate plan. And again, Peter and Marvin are going to be speaking on those 2 issues. Here's an example of the family assessment that I use with families. And what this is a series of statements. And there are a list here of 19 statements plus 2 questions at the end. And the family would read one of these statements, and then they have a chance to evaluate on the left-hand side, how important would this statement be for us to accomplish within our family? And on the right-hand side, they have a chance to indicate, and how well are we doing at this? Here's an example. One of them is this one right here. We have a plan for a genuine transfer of leadership within the family, and with our businesses, if we have any as well. And I mentioned that one because normally that one is listed as a 5 on level of importance, very important for families to achieve, and a 0 on accomplishment, or close to 0 in most families we work with. Many times when I work with a family, the parents will tell me, we're doing pretty well. We communicate great. Everybody, no problems. There's no presenting problem, and they're not looking for the pre-presenting problems of lack of communication and understanding around this. So when I run a family through this, and everybody in the family has a chance to actually give their 2 cents worth on what they think about this, it's amazing to see how many times the parents are grading the family pretty strongly in some of these areas, where the rest of the family is saying, oh my goodness, we haven't started. So it gives the family a pretty good idea of where they need to begin. What's great about this tool is I have a chance to re-administer it after 6 months or a year of working with a family. And it's amazing to see the improvement and the gap analysis, how the gaps narrow. Similarly, Eric and Jennifer Garcia of Relational Wealth Advisors, they have a wonderful process. My wife have done some work with them recently at really trying to engage how do we get into some more of this long-term work with families in the relational side. My wife actually is a relational coach, and so she's already done a lot of work with one of the tools that the Garcias use. But the 5 love languages, I know that a lot of people think, well, that's for couples. But in reality, if you want to express affection and knowing other people in your family and indicate that you know them and you understand them and you want to appreciate them, the 5 love languages is a great tool to take as a family and then to look at what the results are as a group. And so that's part of the process that we take families through as well. And the other piece is that one's more of an assessment. The 5 love languages is more of an assessment, but you can't really grade how well a family is doing on it. It's great observation, and they can work on it and better if they understand. But the next part you really can get into. Eric and Jennifer, again, have a metrics for 7 or 8 different things that they specifically ask family members about. Where are you on your emotional health or relationship health? My wife has 5 that she takes families through in the coaching, relationship coaching she does. But it's a great opportunity for families to grade how well they are in each one of these areas on a scale of 1 to 10, and then to be able to evaluate that as well. So what's interesting about this is I view it, what our role in with families is really in this assessment and the work we're doing is to give them a 30,000-foot view of kind of where they are and hopefully give them a way of metrics to measure their advancement going forward. With that, I'm going to introduce Peter Culver, because Peter's going to take a stab at giving you a 30,000-foot view of what a financial assessment could look like for a family. With that, Peter Culver, CEO of IWM Wealth Management.
Thanks, Tom. Can everybody hear me? Tom, can you hear me okay? Just testing the audio first.
I can hear you perfectly.
Perfectly. So thanks to everyone who's listening today. Hope you're enjoying this program. If you missed the first program, please let us know. We can send you a replay. As Tom has mentioned, the first step in our 6-step process for healthy family governance is a baseline assessment of essentially 3 parts of a family's life. Its family governance activities or lack of governance activities to date, an asset assessment, and an assessment of their current estate planning. Tom's talked about the family governance assessment. I'm just going to say a few words about the asset assessment, which we do really for 3 main reasons. The first is simply, in our view, family governance is inextricably intertwined with the family's assets. And if one of our jobs in family governance is to prepare the next generation to manage the family assets, it's important for us to understand what they are and how they're structured. We sometimes find that both families and advisors, when we get into the area of family governance, will say things like, well, that's not about the money. Our observation is, at some level, it's always about the money and the assets, and we need to understand them. Secondly, every family, depending upon the nature of their assets, tends to have a different vocabulary that they use to talk about their assets and how family members relate to them. And so whether you own an auto dealership or a manufacturing firm or a tech firm, sort of the inside language is going to be a little bit different. And we think it's important for us to understand what that is. And then finally, we think ultimately a key part of family governance is good stewardship of the assets themselves. And often what the asset assessment uncovers is opportunities to improve how those assets are managed. And often we isolate some important areas for improvement. So generally, we go through a couple of steps in the asset assessment. The first one is the slide you're looking at right now. This is a wonderful tool that Tom developed 25 years ago, which we call the Blueprint, and is a very simple tool that just lets us capture, ideally face-to-face with a family, the structure of the assets, the nature of the assets, obviously the people in the family. This first slide is just a blank blueprint. We can usually complete one of these in about a half an hour with the family, but it's a remarkably helpful tool in capturing quite a lot about a family. We turn to the next slide. Sometimes we want to include some notion of what estate planning is underway in a family. And so you can see we can build out either more complicated estate planning that's already in place, or maybe even be in a position to suggest ideas. So that's step one, is the blueprint. Step two, typically we go on and build out a balance sheet, an income statement, and we take a pretty deep dive into the investments, insurance, and estate planning that a family has. And part of what we're about there is helping families answer these questions at the top of this slide. And I won't go through every one, but it is common, maybe surprising, but very common, that when we ask families, what was your rate of return in all of your investments last year? What fees are you paying on your investments? What type of insurance do you have, and what does it cost? Many, many family members have no idea of what the answers to those questions are. So the simple goal is just to identify the key facts and look for ways to improve the situation and really align the assets better with the vision the family has long-term for the family. At the end of this process, we typically write a report which has our conclusions. And again, it's not uncommon that just working through this process, we uncover major opportunities for families to take advantage of. I've listed some here. And so this can contribute to that concept of just a better stewardship of the assets. One thing just to pause and say a word about here, which is just the issue of confidentiality, which is obviously when we work with families, we can do our job better if we have a deeper understanding of what's going on. There's obviously legitimate concern about confidentiality, and just so people should know that just as advisors, we treat that information with the utmost confidentiality, but if it's ever important from a family's perspective to have us sign a confidentiality agreement or a non-disclosure agreement, we are totally agreeable to that. So ultimately, the goals of this asset assessment are twofold. One, to make sure that these assets are structured and managed in a way that promotes healthy family governance and aligns with the other work that Tom's going to talk about today. A second really important goal in our work is to try and promote better collaboration between advisors so that all of the advisors are working together on behalf of better family governance. And regrettably, that's not something that we see uniformly. And so Tom's going to take a few minutes right now and just talk about trying to get advisors to work better together. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Peter. Yeah, and the work that Peter does, and I know some of you have processes like this, and if you don't, being able to integrate the plan and the work you're doing from a wealth and management standpoint within your family or for a family, to be able to link that to the actual purpose that the family has agreed upon is a powerful difference that I hope you have a chance to appreciate. And the work that I do, if I'm helping to prepare a family for what's to come, I need to know what's to come. Not that I'm going to share that in the family meetings. In fact, that would be the last thing I'd want to share in the family meetings. But I think we're trying to build the knowledge of each other, not about the numbers. At this point, early on, later that comes up. But it's important for me to know that, because the kinds of literacy for a family that has $10 million financial net worth is different. What they need is different than a family that has $150 million of financial net worth. And that's different than a family that has $3 billion financial net worth. There's just different levels of language and knowledge they're going to need to understand before they finally receive the assets. So with that, I'm going to jump to the next topic, which is the awareness component. And that to me is this notion of, okay, how do we make people aware, educate them on what the issues are? Many people would say, well, you sit down with a family and you pull out a yellow pad of paper and say, okay, what are the issues? And I'm going to write them down. The problem with that is people are going to give me a sense of the issues based on what they think the issues are and what they think their options are to solve them. Well, if they don't know what the issues are and they don't know what the options are to solve them, that wasn't a great place to start. I consider it sort of an education and extraction process. We need to educate them on what some of the issues are as a group, and then be able to then extract from them as a group what they think the solutions would look like. I'm not going to go through this again because these are some of the slides that I shared in the last webinar, but we would share information like this with the family. The studies, why families are failing. 60% of the failure in families that are failing is due to lack of communication and trust within the family around group decision-making. Group decision-making is governance. 25% fails due to unprepared heirs. You've seen these before, and as I said, I'm not going to go through them because we did cover these last time. I'm also not going to cover in detail this next slide. I'm just reminding you these would be the kinds of slides we would slow down and explain to the family like we did in the last webinar, so that they as a group have an understanding of the issues. Then when we ask, what do you think? They're starting at a baseline much higher. They have a much better understanding of what to say and where to say and where they want to go based on their understanding. So that's all I wanted to say on step 2 in the process, because I think we really covered a lot of that last time. Step 3, though, is where we really start to get into the biggest issue at hand. Step 3, we call it alignment, but we're trying to align the family around communication and leadership styles. And what you're going to see is we use some tools specifically to address that. If what I showed you just a second ago, that Williams and Pressure research, that 60% of the failures due to lack of communication and trust around decision making, then why wouldn't we start there? And so the tool that I take families through is one of those quadrant type communication tests, the Stratton Consulting Group Communication Test. And the quadrants are made up because of the axes, the power axis and the activity axis. What level of authority do you bring in how you speak? Some people are very challenging, like Donald Trump, you know, hey, you're fired. And some people are much more supportive, you know, and Gandhi, Mother Teresa. There are a lot of people that were much more supportive in how they, Nelson Mandela. And some people think, well, the ones on the left are the strong leaders and the ones on the right are mamsy-pamsy, you know, squishy, you know, hand-holding followers. That's not reality. The ones on the right that I mentioned changed the world. The ones on the left I mentioned, not so much. So it's not that one is weak and one is strong. They're both strengths, but they're different. And many times family members don't appreciate these differences. I know you might think you know them, but do you appreciate them? On the activity front, there's people that are very disciplined in how they operate and some that are very spontaneous. And in the Stratton IL interpersonal leadership style test, which is what this one is, they named these different quadrants: the persuader style, the counselor style, the analyzer style, and the director style. And what that would look like on a broader graph would be this one, where the persuaders in the upper left, counselors upper right, analyzers, and then directors. And these differences are quite significant. I'll give you a quick example. I'm in the upper left-hand corner, persuader style. I've got a son that's in the lower right-hand style. And my style of communication was damaging our relationship, let alone our ability to work together. I mean, if I wanted some help shoveling snow this weekend and he was young, I might have said, you know, hey, son, what are you doing on Saturday afternoon? Notice I didn't say anything about shoveling snow, because a persuader would rarely start with the agenda. No, I want to build a case for it first and tell a story. And so by the time I tell him I got to shovel snow, I want him volunteering. On the other hand, the analyzer was looking for, what do you want from me? And the more time I took to build the story, the more upset my son might have been getting along the way. And when I finally realized, I mean, he was leaving the room angry at me, even though I never got to the point of mentioning snow or shovels. And it was about how I was approaching the topic, not what I was trying to get him to do. So that alone literally saved our relationship. There are other tools that are quadrant type tests as well. The lion, beaver, golden retriever, otter might sound kind of silly, but actually it's a very well-known test. This is the results of the test for me. I know it looks complicated, and that's one of my objections to some of these is they get too in-depth. But I'm an otter-lion combination on this test. And notice the quadrants are moved around, though, very typical. If I were to move them around the way the interpersonal leadership style test organizes them, it would look more like this. Then there's the DISC profile, the famous DISC. I was licensed on this for years. And DISC is great, but DISC, the problem with DISC is, again, it's very in-depth. The most recent report I got from me on DISC was 24 pages long. Although it's very accurate, it doesn't help me change. And I'm not going to read everybody else's 24-page report in my family. So if I were, and by the way, somebody combined the DISC profile to the lion, otter, beaver, golden retriever as well. But again, the quadrants are in different locations. If I were to put the DISC profile in the same quadrants as the interpersonal leadership style test, it would look like this. And if I'm going quickly through some of these, I am in some degree intentionally, because I want to get through this, and I want to be able to leave you with the slides that you can then look at later on to slow it down. I'm trying to just give you an indication that many of these relate to a similar quadrant type program. Even the famous Enneagram, this could be brought into quadrants. Well, the difficulty with the Enneagram is they break it down into 3 different broad areas where they have the focus on the heart, the body, and the head. And they clumped these together, even though they're more quadrant type analysis, they clumped them together differently. So the challenger is beside the peacemaker. Well, that's kind of strange, beside the reformer. If I were to group those the way they really could fit in from a quadrant perspective, it would look like the middle section here. And again, I know it's a lot to take in, but you can look at it more slowly later on. There are other tests as well. Some of them are a little bit of a dumb down. These are 2 examples. One on the upper right here, cool blue versus fiery red versus sunshine yellow or earthy green. And they get to parts of what we're talking about, but not the enormity. So we may be adding another webinar just to get into the specifics of which tools to use, depending on what you're dealing with the family. But the interpersonal leadership style test, which is the one I'm showing here, is the one that I prefer. This is the actual test, like many of them, very simple, quick test. You fill it out very quickly, show your preferences, you plot where you are on a quadrant type example, and you'll notice there's quadrants here, but then there are 20 subcategories. And in the book, this is what the book looks like. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. There are these paragraphs, 20 different paragraphs that you can read that relate to the different quadrants or different subcategories I'm indicating in the quadrants here. And what you'd look for is, okay, well, I'm a number 3. And I would then write my name down for my family. You know, Tom is a number 3. And somebody else in the family might indicate that they are a, so I'm over here, let's say. And my wife might be over here. And my son might be over here. And the benefit is you end up with everybody in the family listed in your own book. The best part of the tool is when we take a family through it, we have a chance to get to the last pages where we can talk about, if you have an analyzer in the family or a director, how could you change your style of communication so you can work with them more efficiently and effectively, and they want to work with you rather than your normal style. One family that I was working with recently, they wanted to define success. And I'm not going to go through all of what they put here. I put it up on the screen because I thought you might find it interesting to see in the slides later on when you look at it. But under the, in the middle section, I highlighted 2 different initiatives they wanted to focus on. They wanted to focus on family philanthropy based on their shared values, and on an entrepreneurial mindset based on their culture. And they formed a committee in their first family meeting. First of all, we defined this page in their first family meeting as their family mission statement. But then they wanted to form a committee on those 2 highlighted items. And what they did, this is where the family measured out on the quadrant test I just showed you. And each one of those numbers was another family member. They changed how they formed committees. They made sure there was somebody from every quadrant on every committee. And normally what they were doing is they were asking, who wants to be on a committee? And all the people on the left-hand side were volunteering. Well, all the people on the right-hand side were thinking about it. And the problem was the people on the right-hand side were feeling left out because they were still thinking about it. And so when they changed the committee format, it totally transformed how they're operating going forward. Patrick Lencioni, in his wonderful book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, talks about the importance of this. I'm not going to go through the dysfunctional part of the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I think if you haven't seen it before, it starts with that absence of trust due to fear of conflict, and it works its way up. But on the right-hand side, you can see a functioning team, though, would start with trust. These tools I'm describing are helping to build trust at the very basic level. But it leads, if you can build trust first, a family can engage in unfiltered conflict around ideas, which you can then commit to the decisions, you can then hold each other accountable and achieve results. Well, the famous saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast, is absolutely true in this regard. I'm going to move forward. There's a lot, I know I spent a lot of time on that particular step in the process, and I did because that is such an important reason for a part of the process. Remember, alignment 1 was dealing with the biggest problem, that 60% top. Alignment 2 is where we focus more on the culture of the family, about the values and all, and the education of the family. And that accounts for about 35% of the total. There are multiple tools out there that you can help engage your family and or your clients with when it comes to values. 2164, which you can look up online as well and see some of the tools that they have. They came out with a motivational deck of cards where they each have different values listed on them that the family can choose from. There's another one that you can use picture format. They're very effective and helpful. David York has created a game that families can play to learn about their values and their communication style called Rivets. It's very engaging and it's worth looking at. The tool that I use is the Values Edge Kit, and it's a series of cards again. It's a little bit more extensive. Family gets a deck of cards like this, and they have to pick out of that deck 15 of those cards that they would consider to be, these are my important ones. These are my always important ones. Then they flip over their 15 and see the different categories of color-coded values. Yellow's intrinsic, or excuse me, yellow's lifestyle, blue's intrinsic, green's intrinsic, excuse me, blue's traditional, red's self-expression, but they're very different. And then we have a chance to give them a name badge in the form of a pyramid with a set of stickers, and they repopulate their name badge with the stickers. And it might seem like, well, that sounds like a childish stickers game. It is really interesting to see how family members prioritize their top 15 values. The top one goes at the top, and then they work their way down from there. Most of the families that I've worked with in this have taken all of the different pictures of their family name badges that we create and turned it into a poster so that they can put it up on the wall for future family meetings, reminding each other of who they are. Well, that's clearly this values is an important part of this exercise. But the next part that a lot of people don't get into is, well, what do you do with those values? And Malcolm Gladwell had a great quote for the importance of getting involved with meaningful experiences with people where you have a chance to evidence your values. And he said, you can't share values with others until you share meaningful experiences with them. It's through these meaningful experiences you come to know what their values are, those you agree with and those you don't agree with. But relationship, trust, and friendship has been forged through the experiences first. At first, I didn't quite grasp this, and I had a chance to meet with him and talk about this. And he gave the analogy of, think about your friends from high school. Did you become friends with them when you first met them because you shared values, or was it because you shared experiences? So they were in the same team, the same dorm, the same fraternity. And wasn't it through that you came to know what their values were? And anyway, so we're encouraging families to engage in these activities, to learn about each other's backgrounds, values, to learn about each other. This notion of to know and to be known, to love and to be loved is foundational, and yet most families have moved away from a lot of that knowledge. Well, I'm going to skip to the last part of the, or excuse me, the fifth part that I'm going to focus on, the last part I'm going to focus on, which I can just skip to this slide, which is the action step. And here, very often families are being told family philanthropy is the key solution going forward. Interestingly, although I do agree with family philanthropy being most of the time a great step to get started with, not all the time. Many of the entrepreneurs that I've worked with have said, you know, gee, we just built this business and you're talking about philanthropy, you're talking about giving it away. We think we're doing good right now by giving people a job and giving people self-esteem, giving people a purpose. We're giving to our community. Our community relies on us. We're performing a very important function. We want our family to maintain the business for the good of the world and the community. And philanthropy may be part of that, but it maybe shouldn't be our starting point. So I say that because there are some activities around governance and actions that can be very beneficial for families to learn about each other. Entrepreneurship is a very interesting one. I've done some work at Babson, and they have a wonderful practice of teaching entrepreneurship by learning by doing. Aristotle's quote is brilliant, I think, for this. For those things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. Well, Babson has an approach of teaching, and you can do this, by the way, in a family. This is something we do in family meetings. How do you teach the practice of play? Having a creative and imaginative mind and being able to think outside the box. The practice of empathy. To be able to, you can't solve a problem unless you can perceive that there's a problem, which means you have to understand. When you get to the airport and you see a long line, do you just get in it, or do you realize that's a problem? And then practice of creation, creating solutions that are outside the box, and practice of experimentation to try solutions, and reflecting on all of these. This is a process of education and activity within a family that is powerful, but it has to exist within the family history soup and the culture of the family. And that's what we introduce again in the family meeting process. Some of the best research in this area has been done by Zellweger, Nason, and Norquist, but they talk about, I love this quote, the family entrepreneurial orientation should focus on family culture and family attitudes, such as tradition and the sense of place, feeling like you're part of something. On the other hand, the family entrepreneurial orientation should include entrepreneurial attitudes, proactiveness, learning by doing, and a sense of purpose. Well, that's exactly what we're implementing within families very successfully. The last piece of this is now hopefully a family has, and you've helped the family or your own family, get involved in this process and create a sense of purpose. Okay, great. How do you go from having a sense of purpose to then designing a plan for your wealth and your businesses to have the wealth and the businesses align itself with the purpose of the family? And to speak about that is Marvin Blum, the founding member, a founding partner of the Blum firm. And Marvin, welcome. I hope you're here.
Thank you. Yes, sir, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Excellent. Well, Tom, thank you for allowing me to speak on this portion of the webinar. I back up for a moment. We were talking earlier about the assessment process, and Peter was talking about the importance of reviewing the financial aspects of the plan and including the estate plan. I want to say something about that, because what I have found in reviewing existing estate plans is that usually the plan that's in place is not promoting the family's purpose. There is a disconnect and actually can work against the family goals of communication and trust. For example, if a family's estate plan creates extremely large trusts that throw off huge distributions to unprepared heirs, we have a recipe for disaster. We end up with heirs who feel entitled. It can pit heirs against each other. It can destroy their self-esteem. You end up with a family that doesn't look at all like the way you want your family to look going forward down the road. The money ended up ruining the kids. You created trust babies. Instead, we believe that you need to be intentional in the estate plan, to actually create a plan that drives the family's purpose. For example, you ask a family, what do you want the family to look like in 25 years? What's your vision of this family? And then we can begin to put in place pieces of the estate plan that will improve the odds that they'll get there. What we often find is there is a missing link. And Tom, if you'll turn on to the next slide.
Okay, just a second.
Yeah, how do we get there? We're talking here about estate plans having a missing link in them, that there's something missing in this estate plan that will help this family look like it wants to look down the road. And that missing link is often the fact that there is no mechanism in place to ensure that these best practices will take place, that this family will do the things that successful families are doing. And this is often solved in a practical way by creating a type of trust. Let's go to the next slide. So this next slide, this type of trust that Tom and I have collaborated on creating is called a FAST, F-A-S-T, a Family Advancement Sustainability Trust. And this is, in fact, a solution here. It is the missing link that we often want to recommend to families for their estate plans. And because we're recognizing that successful families are doing things like holding family retreats and educating their heirs to be responsible inheritors. They're teaching them about philanthropy. They're doing certain best practices. But when the parents are alive, G1 is alive, they may be doing all the legwork on that and they may be paying for it. But when G1 is gone, who's going to pick up and do what G1 was doing? And this trust is designed to pick up and fill the role of the G1 generation after G1 is gone. It does two primary things. First, it is funded with assets, and those assets are used to pay for these activities, to pay for educating the heirs to be responsible inheritors, to pay for family enrichment activities such as annual retreat. So it's going to provide the money to pay for it. And number two, it assigns leadership to trustees and committee members who will make sure that these activities actually happen. You know, here's the deal. Often the patriarch and the matriarch are paying for these things and taking care of planning them, and they're gone, and let's say they had 3 kids. And the family decides to have a family retreat. Let's say the cost of the retreat is $75,000. And you go to each child and you say, I need from each of you $25,000 to pay your 1/3 share. Well, guess what? There will be some years where somebody in there is going to say, no, I don't want to spend $25,000 on that this year. Instead, we're going to remodel our kitchen, or we're going to go to Europe, or my spouse thinks that we can do something else with that money this year. This solves that problem because it provides the money to pay for it. And then the other thing it solves is the dilemma of who's going to do the legwork to plan all of this. And if you rely on those 3 kids to do all the legwork, well, guess what? You know, life gets in the way. They're going to get busy. They may drop the ball. Here, we now have a group of trustees and committee members who are going to be charged with the responsibility of doing all that legwork to plan the retreats and bring in the speakers and the programming, and they'll be paid for doing all of that. Let's go to the next slide. In the webinar that we're going to be doing next, we're going to dive deeper into this topic. I will tell you that, and we're aiming for that webinar. At this point, we're looking at April 30th as the date, but we'll get back in touch with the firm details on that. But the idea here is the trust that I'm talking about is a pretty complicated document. We have worked very hard to develop a template that can be tweaked to each family's needs. But suffice to say that it's not just a simple do-it-yourselfer. You want to do this carefully. We typically design it as a dynasty trust created under a state law that has good directed trust laws, Delaware being a great example. And we split up the work here into different groups. There's an administrative trustee, there's an investment committee, there's a distribution committee, there's a trust protector committee, etc. I'm not going to go into all the details of that. I want to just say enough about it to let you in on the fact that it is more involved than it might sound. But we'll demystify all of that for you in the next webinar. Let's go to the next slide. Funding. Often we get the question, okay, if we create a FAST, how much do we put in it? And the answer varies from family to family, and you have to counsel with each family to determine, first, of course, what the family's financial means are, and second, what is their agenda? How expensive are these activities going to be? And you can come up with a solution. And typically it would be minimally funded while G1 is alive, but at G1's death, there would be a pour over into this trust so that there would be assets to pay for these activities after G1 is gone. And it may not be enough that will last forever, but the trust can be replenished over time. The final bullet point here is a very important one. I have often found that the best solution for funding is to take out a separate life insurance policy that is specifically dedicated to this purpose, so that the family does not have to disrupt its existing asset base, leaves everything else intact, but there would be a life insurance policy, perhaps a second to die policy on the mom and dad, that would pay into this FAST trust and provide the funding for the next, to do all of these activities for the next generation. And Tom, let's go to the next slide. Very important point that comforts a lot of folks on this, and that is this FAST does not have to disrupt an existing estate plan, because I understand many families have worked hard on their plan and they don't want to open that door. This actually can tack on top of and add on to their existing plan without disrupting the existing plan, especially if you do it with a separate life insurance policy dedicated to paying for it. Then the existing assets in the plan can stay intact, and this will simply bolt on top of the existing plan without having to disrupt it. So those were my teaser comments. Tune into the next webinar and learn a lot more of the ins and outs of the FAST Trust. Tom?
Yeah, thank you very much, Marvin. Actually, Marvin and I and Gary Post, one of Marvin's partners at the Blum firm, actually co-authored an article on this called the modern practice and the FAST solution to legacy planning. And we are going to focus on that on the next webinar on April 30th. But there's a lot more to it than meets the eye, and I really encourage you, whether you're a family or advisor or anything in between, I think you're going to find it engaging and interesting what some of the applications are. But I would say this: parents that I work with are much more likely historically to endow a chair at a university to help educate strangers than they are to endow a chair at their family table to help educate the family. They would actually, literally trust an endowment to manage an institution to give an education to people that they'll never meet, then actually set up some kind of an endowment for the family to engage in a lifelong learning process going forward. Well, next webinar topics, there are a number that we could choose from, but the one that on this list, the FAST Trust, is going to be the next meeting, and as Marvin just mentioned with Gary Post and myself, we co-authored that article, but we've all been giving the presentation on this topic as keynote address to estate planning conferences around the country. I'm doing one similar to this in Boston in a couple of weeks, and I know Marvin's done some in the West Coast and in Texas, and I've done one in New Jersey recently. Gary has done some. We're going to give you what we think are the best concepts and insights from the presentation we've done. You can see there's a list of other topics that will be coming up, and not in that order exactly, but there's a lot of very engaging topics. We've shuffled it a little bit from the last time we showed it to you because of insights that people gave us from the evaluations. But the next webinar will be about the FAST, and so please join us on April 30th at 4 p.m., and you can sign up for that probably starting in a day or two if you'd like. Conclusions from all this. Well, we did cover a lot. This 6-step process, I've given you an idea of the process we would take a family through, how we actually implement it when it comes to the actual family meetings. Normally we would do this step 1, the assessment, before a first family meeting. We would then do step 2 and 3 in the first family meeting. We would repeat step 3 and get into step 4 at a second family meeting, or if the family does a family retreat, 2-day retreat, we would do step 3 and step 4 in the second day of the family retreat, leaving them with an idea of what actions could they take going forward. After that, it really depends on the engagement, what the family's looking for, the level of services they need, support they need. And so some families, we do a lot of work in between meetings, working with individual family members. And some families, the committees operate pretty effectively right away, and we really come in to help support the next family meeting, and that's it. And then the advancement is the long-term part of it. Well, I'm going to skip this slide. It's something I hope to cover at a future event, but I will jump to the last one here, which is, okay, I'm going to have to just put this up because it's not, I'm not jumping effectively. So if you want to go fast, I've mentioned this last time, go alone. All the entrepreneurs that I work with know exactly what I mean by that. But if you want to go far, go together. The other proverb I'd lay in there that, again, came from Eric Garcia and Jennifer Garcia, but it's really Leonard Sweet's quote. It's sort of ish Leonard Sweet's quote. What you did is your history. What you put in motion in your family is your family legacy. And what I love about what Marvin and I and Peter are doing is helping families actually start the process of setting something new and different in motion for the future. I hope this has been helpful to give you a sense of what this could look like, either for your practice or for families. If you do want to engage in this in either in your family or your practice, remember, know your boundaries. You can't get into substance abuse issues. You can't get into alcoholism or mental health issues. There are many things that you can't get into divorce counseling when they're in the heat of the moment. So there are professionals that need to be brought in, but there's a lot of the work that we've described that actually you can get engaged in. And if you need help, and if you, I mean, this is what we do at GenLeg, but if you need help at getting started in this space, please let us know. But get started, and get started now. Waiting is not a good option. So that's all that we have for this webinar. I went through a lot. Please look at the slides. I also am going to post a set of resources that you can go to. One of the books that I'd strongly recommend is The Myths of Happiness, and you'll see that listed. It gets into hedonic adaptation. It's a way of getting people from that red zone to the green zone, or preventing them from getting to the red zone in the first place. So please take a look at that. If you'd like to have, if you want to stick around and have any questions, I will attempt to open up the mics if I can figure out how to do it, and be happy to entertain any questions that people may have. But for those that have to go, thank you very much for attending. Look forward to hearing your comments in between, and hopefully seeing you on the next event. Any thoughts or questions? I think I unmuted all the attendees.
Hello?
Yes, I hear somebody said hello. Somebody said hello.
I have a question.
Yes.
Where will the slides be available, both from the first one and this one?
On the FamLeg website, and you should be able to go in. You should be getting an email from this webinar indicating how to get access to the handout and replay. This is recorded for your benefit, so you can replay it going forward. At least I hope we recorded it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
How do you define philanthropy when other members of the family have different definitions for philanthropy?
Yeah, how do you define philanthropy when people might have different definitions of philanthropy? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Yes, and I try to give an indication of that some people think that it is very philanthropic of me to give people a job. So that's different than deciding to take some of my earnings and give it away to people. Don't get me wrong, I think a combination can be great. But even if you decide you want to give away a certain amount of money, some people think philanthropy is giving to the arts, and some people think it's giving to human development. And so philanthropy means different things to different people. I would say that the values test, what we're looking for in the values test that we take families through, is not where are the separate values, but where are the overlapping values. And we may have half the family that wants to give to the Republicans and half the family that wants to give to the Democrats, but they might, and they're not going to come to a agreement on that, but they might come to agreement that perhaps in our local community we could give to the Boys and Girls Club, or we could give to a local school, or there's something that what we're looking for in the values is the overlap, and the Together Family Philanthropy gifts are made from the overlap. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't give separately from their own resources to things that they believe in that are different than what the family believes in. But this idea of trying to identify an overlap is really important. I hope that helps to answer your question.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for those that attended. It seems like most people have signed off. Really appreciate and look forward to your comments along the way. So please let us know what you liked, didn't like, and where we can go from here. Thank you very much for your time.